So here's a project for Leave the Door Open. It's at 74 BPM, and interestingly, I originally thought that this song was recorded in free time because it sounds very live, very sort of jam kind of feeling. But turns out that it's recorded to a click, which is at 74 BPM. So the interesting thing about this project is that it is more produced to a grid than I thought, but still sounds great. So it's just another way to approach it. So let's just listen to the project for now. Now let's get to the tracks. Now it opens up with a drum fill, which I think it's pretty cool. And it's got this nice fat drum sound. So the drum kit that we used was the Blue Ridge kit under Drum Kit Designer, Stereo. And this is the Blue Ridge kit. And as you can see, there's some processing going on. And the first thing we did was to compress it a little bit, just to give it a little bit more presence and punch. And here's without everything. I'm just going to take everything out. Here's how it sounds. And here's it with the compressor. Definitely more punchy and of course louder as well in the overall. So, and then we use an enveloper to reduce the sort of release a little bit to tighten up the kit. You can sort of hear that the snare is tighter, and if we remove this, there's more decay to the snare. So this one is sort of like just to remove the decay. Yeah, it's a lot of like the kit's been dampened a little bit. And then we added an overdrive, sort of a bright tube overdrive. Give it a bit of saturation. And then a tube EQ to attenuate the highs a little bit, just to give it that, sort of like roundness at the top. So it's not too shiny. Give it a bit of that H sort of vibe. And then final EQ just to remove a bit of the snares low end and to give the kick a little bit more power. And because this is not a separate kit that you can EQ, it's fine. I did it this way and I feel like it kind of works out. And the end, just a little reverb. And in this case, the reverb is large space plate reverb, sustain plate, 100% wet. And it's sent to bus 1. And just to give it a bit of sort of like this room sound. And this this plate reverbs are a little bit more, I would say, not as shiny as the realistic sounding reverbs that Space Designer might have in the large spaces. These rooms and halls are really realistic because they are sort of real spaces. Plate reverbs are sort of like this mechanical reverbs, and they sound a little bit more, for want of a better word, a bit more retro. So I think it's perfect for something like that. And in this case, we did reverb on the whole kit. Normally you wouldn't do that, but I felt like it's worked out since we don't have the separate pieces anyway. Just nice and fat with lots of harmonics, you can see. And the first thing that comes in terms of the instruments is the piano. And it's got this nice width about it, and I was trying to figure out how to get it to sound wide. And initially it was just sort of like the Steinway grand piano, and you can see the track here. But I found that I needed it to sound wider without sort of being too processed. So what I did was I paired it with classical piano. You can find it under Factory Acoustic Pianos, Classical Piano. And what I did then was to put it in a stack. So what you can do is just pick a track another track, and you right click and you say create track stack. It'll ask you if you want to do a folder or summing stack. I do a summing stack, there's more control there. So what you get is a stack that you can open and close, and one MIDI track controls sort of the MIDI on all these tracks. So it's playing the same MIDI here and here, and you get to pan them, you get to change the levels, and it sounds like a wider piano. By itself, without the classical piano. And this one's panned to the right, the classical piano. So they sound slightly different with different samples, and put together it really sounds good. And within each track itself, there is also a bit of reverb, and in this case it's going to bus 3, which is a nice hall. This one's pretty smooth, it's a medium reverb hall, nice hall. And on this one as well, it's going to bus 3, and you can see there's a bit of EQing going on just to take out some of the highs, the shiny bits, and a bit of that mids. And in the classical piano as well, the same thing with the compressor on this side, because I felt like it needed a little bit of sort of like squeezing on that right side a little bit. So it's nice and smooth, and just with the kit. So it's got a bit of that retro, slightly tapey kind of sound about it. And then we go to the bass. Now the bass is a simple, you go under bass, electric bass, thumb stroke bass. And it's just this nice little low bass. Pretty straightforward. And then we sent it through a bass amp. Yeah, just a simple one. You know, something. You can leave it out if you want, because these basses are actually sort of mic'd from the amps. But thought I gave it a little bit more sort of character. And in this case, it's going to a reverb as well, and it's the same one in bus 1, which is the plate reverb. So that's the sort of main instrument, which is this tree, and that's kind of carrying most of the texture already. And with this sort of live or fake live instruments, normally the bass, the drums, and some sort of rhythm, whether it's piano or guitar, kind of cover most of the basses already. And what's nice is this one has a glockenspiel, which is under orchestral tune percussion glockenspiel, and it's adding this little sheen and character on top of it. So it's got this very nice sort of extra harmonics on top of the piano, and it comes in and out, so it's this little sort of phrases that make it interesting. And as you can see here, there's another piano track, and it's called Piano Softer, and basically it's the same thing. Like in this case, this one's not the Steinway piano, it's actually supposed to be the classical piano. That's right. It just says Steinway here because that's a preset, but we've changed this to the classical piano, so it's the same thing, Steinway and classical. And you can see that the tracks, this is minus 17.2, this is 9.2, they're much softer. So in the verse, the piano track, this Piano Softer track, is basically this track but softer. Not so in your face. And you know, it depends on the sections where we need it to rise and go down. We sort of use different tracks. So that's a trick you can do. You know, copy your tracks over, process them slightly differently, maybe EQ them slightly differently, or make them just softer, and then they sort of can seamlessly transfer without really being very obvious about it. You can hear that sort of like it gets bigger and bolder over this section, and it's quieter in the verses. So, and then we move on to electric guitars, and this one's straightforward as well. Is under guitars, electric guitars, twangy electric, and we send it to an amp as well. First, we put it through an EQ, and you can see that the lows all been taken out because all we need is the high end of it. Very simple chordy type stuff. You send it to the pedal board with a few dries, funk, and blue echo to give it a little bit more of that retro character. And finally, we send it through an amp, which is under clean, original Nashville, bit of a tweed kind of sound. And it's just sitting in the background, giving a little bit more character to the sounds. Let's just hear it with some of the instruments. So it's kind of acting a bit like a rhythm snare kind of thing. And oh yeah, this one's pretty fun. The intro has this sort of like guitar sound. And normally what this is sort of like the pick of the guitar is moving really quickly across the strings, and but we emulated this with a sampler of under guitars, electric guitars, muted electric guitar, and it goes through a very similar sort of chain. You can see that there's low attenuation, there's a stereo delay, which you can find under delays, stereo delay, and then we send it through another amp, and in this case it's a clean old brown amp, and you can hear it like that. Creates that retro vibe, and also it's sent through bus 1, which is the plate space designer. Yep, sustain plate. So together we have everything. And you can see there's strings as well, but these strings are pretty lo-fi. You can get them under sampler. You go to orchestral strings, string ensemble, and they're lo-fi because that's how they sound in the track, and it works really well as a sort of like this pad within the track. It doesn't always have to be like sounding like this big smooth orchestra. You can process your strings as well, and in this case we sort of took out a lot of the high end and including the mid, so it's sort of scooped out a little bit. And what's interesting, I think, is that this is original sound, much smoother, a little bit fatter as well, and we send it through a filter, the Evoc 20 filter bank, and we sort of use the default one. And you can see how it thins the sound out. So this filter bank sort of creates a bit of a lo-fi sound already, but it does have some resonances, so we took it out with some EQ. So that smoothens out, and we added the chorus, which you can find under modulation, chorus, stereo. And this chorus, we use a slow oscillating modulation just to create that width a little bit, a bit of that movement. Great for pads. It's very subtle, but our chorus is usually really fantastic for pads, and I like to use that. And we send it to Bus 3 Space Designer, which we saw just now, which is a nice hall under medium spaces. So that, don't be afraid to sort of mix your reverbs a little bit. You know, sometimes we have 2 or 3 different reverbs, and maybe 5 or 6 different reverbs going on for different things. And sometimes one thing can be sent to the multiple reverbs at the same time as well. In this case, we're sort of just mixing stuff, and each one sort of goes to its own kind of reverb that's suitable for it. So we got the strings, and then we have the baritone sax, which is under studio horns, stereo, and only the baritone sax goes this low, so we picked the baritone sax. It was a bit harsh, so we took out some EQ, quite a bit of EQ, to sort of make it sit better, and here's how it sounds. It's a bit like this adds like a little distorted pad underneath everything, and we send it to its own bus as well, which is bus 8. As you can see, the Space Designer is Prince Hall 1, which is a large, sort of smooth sounding reverb. And let's just listen to sort of like the pads going together. Sounds a little bit out of place, right? But when you put everything in, it just fills up the space in a musical way. So one thing to pay attention to is not everything has to be sounding great by itself. It's got to sound great in context, and you got to know why these things are placed there. And you know what I would strongly suggest is when you have the project, just mute something and listen without, and then unmute it and listen, or maybe just solo a few parts. And you get a feel for how things work together. So, we build upon sort of the shoulders of giants, and the people who arrange this song, the producers who put together this song, have a certain vision of the song. So we use these great arrangements and break them down and have sort of like a learning experience by listening to the different parts. Like how these rhythms, things go together. And this is a very nice sort of little brassy synth that you can find in Alchemy. And under brass, you can find vintage brassy bass. And it's just pretty much the default one. And you can hear sort of this brassy, nothing special by itself as well. A lot of EQ to sort of make it sit a little bit better. And as you can see, most of the EQ that we have are sort of this cutting EQ. So there's a lot of reduction going on rather than sort of boosting. So I find that sort of this carving away EQ works easier for me to get the kind of sounds that I want. And in this case, there's even more EQ reduction. There's a bit of bass increase, and there's a bit of high attenuation. And I really like this tube EQ to sort of like smoothen out the highs a little bit by having an attenuation. And then there's the chorus, which is sort of like to make it sit a little bit better. And in this chorus, it's just the basic user default one. If you take out the chorus, it's sort of a bit more in your face, but when you put the chorus in, it sort of sits a bit nicer in the background. So that's a little trick as well. I tend to use choruses to sort of like push things towards the back a little bit. And then there's a little pad underneath here, which is also an Alchemy pad. And under pads, you can find 1940s choir. And it's a really simple sort of like filler kind of thing. Just chords going underneath. And it doesn't seem to do very much, but it does add to the sort of atmosphere of the verses. Because there's so much spaciousness in the playing of the instruments that it's kind of nice to have it there. You could put something like a little sort of swirly organ underneath as well. I thought that would sit well without being too in your face. But these kind of pads work perfectly fine too. And then you have little sort of like sometimes I want a particular crash and I can't find it in the kit that I want. So in this case, I use a Portland kit and just get, it's got this nice little sort of splashy crash. So, especially in the digital form, even if you're creating sort of like something that sounds like people playing live, you can sort of mix and match your drum kits a little bit, and sometimes you just want a little bit of like a side stick, and the Brooklyn kit has a nice side stick, so I'm just using the Brooklyn kit for the side stick. And of course, sometimes I duplicate the track. These are all the same tracks. So just to make the arrangements a bit easier. So sometimes in the bridge, I need to organize my thoughts a little bit better. These are all the same tracks. So you can see they all light up. Yep. And yeah, so you can see that the arrangement isn't particularly thick. You don't have to have a lot of instruments, but it does sound very rich, and there's a lot of musicality in the arrangement. And something to pay attention to is like the bass, right? If you want nice bass lines, I think the length of each note matters a lot and how it's played. So sometimes, it's just a matter of changing the length a little bit just to get the right feel for the bass line. Even though this one's meant to be sort of like emulating a real bass player, even when you're doing electronic kits, I think it helps a lot to know that the lengths really matter and how it works with the sort of drums and rhythm. Yeah, it does. Having this tight rhythm section really does help with the feel of everything. And then having sort of like 2 bars or so of sort of accents. And you can see that string ensembles as well, we have different sections because some of the things that we need, in this case, these are the longs and these are the shorts. So they're kind of like a run. We sort of fake runs, of course, and accents like that. So I would highly recommend just creating duplicates of different sort of like articulations, and sometimes of the same articulation but different levels or different treatments a little bit. You can see that the string ensemble here is not the same as the string ensemble here. The levels are different. This one's much louder and this one's much softer. I found that I needed to bring the string ensemble up in the pre-chorus because the pre-chorus is this. Honestly, I find that the loudest section of this song is the pre-chorus. It really needs to be brought up, and the chorus is kind of a little bit more chill. So that's an interesting thing. Like sometimes the pre-chorus is sort of like a ramp up, and then the chorus is a even higher ramp. But in this case, the pre-chorus is the highest ramp, and then we kind of drop for the chorus. So interesting sort of arrangement and songwriting there. And yeah, so you gotta have different sections. I don't really recommend automation. I find that automation's a bit too fiddly, and sometimes if you don't always have it open, you kind of forget what your automation is. So knowing this, you can straight away look at the levels and say, oh, this is sort of higher, and you can even label it, like in this case, piano and piano softer. It's just more sort of like structured and easy to recognize and organize. And a very big part of mixing your tracks is organizing your tracks so you know where things are and it's not making it difficult for you. So yeah, that's the tutorial for this track. I really hope you download this project, have a listen, because all these sections have very interesting arrangements as well, and it'll be nice for you to break it down and see how things are played out and arranged. So I hope you learned something useful today with this project. All the best with your music. See ya.